I should love this show. I'm the perfect audience for, an anime based on a video game, and I play like all of the games, and I like anime, and it's basically a shounen. It should be the perfect audience. Yet this show is so incredibly bad, absurdly frustrating. However, you probably heard that before, right? So this video here is that I will try to explain why this show is so bad. Why is it actually that Castlevania is a frustrating show to watch? And this has been true since season 1, for that matter. I never really liked this anime at all. I don't hate it, but it's also been very mid, right, from the beginning. And I've been thinking about it a lot then, since I watched the new Castlevania last week. And I have come to the conclusion, and I'll explain again why it actually is so terrible. And of course, a general sense, it's because the pacing. Pacing is, of course, incredibly bad in this show. And I feel everyone agrees with that, right? However, the real issue isn't the pacing itself, it's actually how this show is so pointless. So what do I mean with pointless? What I mean is that this show is incredibly cliché, it's incredibly by the book, right? And that's why it gets boring. And the formula of the show is basically is that they've taken famous, much better written shows, right? Copied that storytelling, removed all the nuance, made it very, very generic, and you can basically skip over 1 to 8, the premise start, and then the last Sakuga animation in episode 8, right? Everything in between there is basically pointless almost in every episode. So let's talk about it in detail. So if you like the video, guys, please press the like button, subscribe, guys. And I like to think about the stuff right in details, right? I watched the show last Friday. I bet it's binged it the first day, and then I've been thinking about it right, for a few days before I just made my video. I wasn't gonna just jump for the review. I was like, nah, I want to think about this because I think one general reason why I dislike the show so much, and I think a lot of people agree with me, is because the potential is there, Every season when you watch Castlevania, the potential is there to be something amazing, yet they always fail, right? It's always like a promise of, okay, it's gonna be good soon, right? But it never gets good. And it was frustrating because this show has very, very high budget. Obviously from an animation standpoint, the show was great. It looks great, right? It looks fantastic. But everything else is really, really poor. So you get frustrated because you can watch other animes that has like 10th of the budget and they're 10 times more entertaining, right? So this show you're like, why does it every time fail? It's very frustrating, I suppose. But anyway, let's talk about the real reason then that the show. No, obviously Anette is the worst thing in the show. So let's talk about why the issue is the cliché writing, right? Not necessarily the pacing, but more so how every episode is just incredibly pointless, which means the pacing feels terrible, right? And Anette, of course, is the perfect. Her backstory is so bad, her flashback is so nothingness. Anette is truly the perfect example of why this show is terrible. And I have to say, as a side note though, it is really frustrating how Netflix just cannot write cast like Anette, right? Every time they have an Anette character, you know exactly how they're gonna be. They're gonna have sex and personality. So it's gonna be a female girl boss, right? Incredibly dislikable and so on, right? In the general sense. And it's very frustrating to watch it, right? Because they never manage to write kids like Anette. They're always basically the worst character in every Netflix show. But I digress. The real issue with Anette is how shallow and predictable her story is, right? This is true for every character, but especially for Anette. Okay, so let's break it down, right? So again, I think everyone basically agrees that the pacing is terrible in this show, and especially in the flashbacks, right? But the real issue that the flashback is so bad is because you know exactly what's gonna happen. Because every flashback, every story on the whole show basically is so by the book, right? So the thing is that Castlevania writers are terrible. They just take older animes, right, like One Piece, Naruto, whatever, commented soon later, and just steal those ideas, right? But they make them so generic and so shallow that you can all tell exactly what's going to happen, yet they prolong them forever, right? So that's the reason the pacing feels so bad. But again, it's really the pacing, it's more how pointless it is. You have to watch a flashback, which you already seen 50 other times over, right? Because we need to have a sad flashback, but it's just badly written. A big issue too is that there is no nuance to it, right? With Anette, the only nuance is her powers. Oh, she can earth bend and metal bend or whatever, right? The nuance isn't in her personality or in the backstory. This is a slight different power alteration of another flashback I've seen before in my life. And also, I digress, but Terra should have been the earthbender by a name, okay? But anyway, the thing then with Anette, of course, is that you're watching her episode, and you're just like, oh yeah, of course she's gonna do this thing and be saved, and of course her friend's gonna sing and save her. Like, you can basically predict everything, right? And that's where you sit there and feel kind of bored. And I'm sure that Netflix, this show, would never be popular at all if it wasn't binged. Because, yeah, every time, every season, you're like, I can skip all the middle episodes because nothing happens in them. And again, they're so predictable, right? I basically, in episode 1, I can guess basically every flashback before, right? And then they're so prolonged, I'm like, what I watch this for? It's really, really boring. It gets so boring. Oh my god, it gets so boring. And the even worse example, this truly is the worst example of it, is actually Richter, right? So Richter is not a worse character than Anette. I mean, the problem with Anette is also that she hates Richter all the time, right? And her behavior as Richter is really dislikable, but also predictable. Again, everything with Anette, everyone knows that Anette is gonna go all girl bossy on Richard, right? That'd be super annoying. Everyone knows it, right? Everyone knows that she's gonna fake constantly, yet she's gonna act as she's the best and so on. Everyone knows that. It's so predictable. But, so while Anette then is the worst written character overall, the absolutely worst scene in this show, and a perfect example of why this show is incredibly badly written, is of course when Richard goes Super Saiyan, QB, Hollow Ichigo form, right? Yeah. There is straight up a shounen awakening scene in this anime, right? But there's no logic for it, because it's an incredibly cliche show with no understanding of what actually they're doing, right? So basically, it straight up is stolen from Naruto. Richard meets his grandfather, Juste Belmont, which is also terribly written. Juste Belmont is basically Jiraiya Sensei, right? He looks like Jiraiya, white hair and so on. They talk about the hidden powers, right? The QB, right? And then Richard goes out there, he starts crying a bit, and then he suddenly goes QB form, right? He transforms, he goes Super Saiyan. That's basically it. However, of course, in Naruto, Jiraiya actually teaches Naruto abilities first. But they have removed the logic from it. They have removed that classic, like, at least half the episode should have been a training arc. Or at least have Juste Belmont explain to him, this is how you use mad bad writing. He's incredible bad writing. Incredibly cliche, it's very, very common. But again, there's logic, right? In the other animes, there's logic. They have an inner demon. They have this stuff going on or whatever. Yes, it's cliche, but it makes sense. When they meet their grandpa, their mentor, he teaches them new moves and abilities so they can awaken, right? This has all the tropes. It has all the cliche moments of a shonen awakening scene, but the logic isn't wrong. He doesn't have any inner demons or whatever, and the grandpa gives him no new abilities. But yet, it happens, right? And this whole show is incredibly predictable, and everything happens exactly as you predict it's gonna happen, without logic or reason to it. One thing I have to say that was I found hilariously bad is that after Richard goes Super Saiyan or whatever, right? Everything goes full anime. Yeah, it's just like the woman, the main antagonist, becomes some kind of snake monster, right? Her sidekicks, becomes like a typical, yeah, like flares. Oh my god, this is hilariously how it was anime. Certainly, it was well animated, but my god, it's just like, oh my god, he's changed. Like, none of the characters made any sense. They don't fit the storyline at all, and the set piece. But anyway, it brings us to the issue, which of course is the main antagonist. And, I mean, this is again an issue, generally speaking, right, of these shows. Typical Netflix shows, I think, honestly. Because they have the cliche, right? They have the sad backstory and so on. But Netflix is a very cool Netflix. They basically always refuse to give the villains a good backstory, right? And Dracula was the exception. He actually had an interesting backstory. So now we're back to the generic black and white Netflix character, very binary, where the character is just evil for being evil, right? And it's just really boring. I mean, it's just boring, right? It's just, okay, here's the character. And an issue with that, though, because I do agree, honestly, some people say, I'm going to defend it. And I do agree, you don't need to have these like super complex, evil guys, right? The thing is that if you don't have overly complex villains, antagonists, you don't really need to have overly complex good guys either. That's a huge issue, right? Because if you're gonna have the villains being incredibly one-dimensional, think about like Mario, okay? Bowser in the first Mario games, very one-dimensional, right? Nintendo's games are quite one-dimensional. But Mario is also one-dimensional. I wanna save the princess. That's it, right? There's no real storytelling there. Mario doesn't have like a 10-episode sad backstory, right, So I think it doesn't fit into the storyline. Honestly, not really. To have this like super one-dimensional villains, yet the heroes who need to have 3-4 episodes of backstories, right? Because think about it, this season is half backstories, right? It's like 3-4 episodes of backstories. So you can, but the bad guys get like a minute of backstory, right? Yeah, they have like no backstories. And that just makes it really unappalling, because they're like, okay, I know so much about the good guys, yet the bad guys are so incredibly boring and plain. Obviously, Osrak is the only interesting guy, right? He's playing kind of the neutral game, right? He's interesting. But everyone else is just really, really boring. And otherwise, it also is really badly written, generally speaking. But Annette's main, vampire that she, grew up with, she just meets him at the graveyard. This scene make no sense. Generally speaking, it's truly a badly written show. Like, honestly, the Anette scene just made really no sense. She just meets her main antagonist, in her life, with her mom and so on, right? Why does he suddenly appear at the graveyard, right? Doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of those scenes. There's another scene when Anette is leaving the house and she's walking, and suddenly she just is at the Whitley. It doesn't make any sense. It's another scene when they're running back home again. The Terra leaves, and it just cuts. So there's a lot of like a weird interaction where it feels like the character are just meeting up for no reason, right? Or the character just escapes for no reason, and back and forth. So it's very, very simplistic with it as well, because everything just happens that has to happen, right? Which again comes back to the, pointless, generic, by the book predictability. For example, one thing that really annoyed me is the priest guy, right? Don't honestly badly written. His behavior makes no sense. But generally speaking, spoilers here, who was surprised that he was the Forge guy? I was like 1 second into that, he's the Forge guy. The first second, I was like, he's better than evil. It's so boring that everything is by the book. Like the guy that becomes one of the night creatures, he's gonna help Annette. Again, by the book, right? This is one of the most predictable shows I've ever seen in my life, right? That I keep saying it, and I'm sorry I'm broken record, but honestly, right? It feels like you could honestly skip like the first 7 episodes, because you just seeing the premise of it. I know exactly what's gonna happen, and the only thing that's left to watch is the very high animation in the end episode, right? Because everything up to that point, I can genuinely guess. Lastly, let's talk about the characters. So Maria is the only character that I liked, okay? She's a likable female character. Still cliché. Of course her father will betray her and so on. But honestly, yeah, she works. I think one thing with Maria is that her abilities looks the best in the anime, right? So how they're animating her animals, her spirits, definitely looks the best. And her general motion, which is like running around and doing stuff and flying and so on, looks the best, I think. So that also makes her visually more likable. So she's the best character. I think I kind of like her mom too, better speaking. The last end scene, of course, was just terrible, because again, it's so predictable. But, I suppose. But every other character, well, not, okay, fine, he's pretty cool. But everyone else, terrible characters, right? And one thing that I have to address here, which has been said by many people though, so it's nothing new here, is how Richter is sort of screen time, right? You want it to be a Belmont show, right? This, of course, is the Netflix issue, because they really make it the Anette show. Like, why is it called Anette? And obviously, I keep saying it, but it's nothing new, right? Everyone knows Anette is the worst character, but I do think that, as I mentioned earlier, it's partially the Netflix curse of really, really badly written female, like girl boss characters, which also means that typically the girl boss will take screen time from the other characters, right? Regardless of the gender, they will take screen time from the other characters, and in this case, then Richter and Maria, but especially Richter. So he has sort of the screen time, right? And then comes back to that scene where he meets his grandpa, and it just happens for him, right? Instead of having, you could cut away a whole episode of Anette. You could have removed like 50 minutes of Anette, right? Make her screen time way shorter. Instead have him meeting grandpa, have a little training arc or whatever, right? Have grandpa explain the Belmont stuff, maybe have some flashback of, Juste doing stuff, whatever, right? And then that leads into Richard getting his powers back. That would have made sense. It would have made it more a Belmont storyline, right? And so on. So that makes better sense. It's obvious. And that comes to my general frustration with the show, right? Because it really, to me, is amazing how every season of the show is just bad. And I don't think it's the worst thing ever. But like I said earlier in the beginning of the video, it's very frustrating because you can see how much money they have, the budget they have, right? How easy it's supposedly should be to write these characters, yet they keep failing. For example, when Grandpa appears, not only doesn't he train his grandson, he does like one cool thing, then does nothing, right? How fun is that, you know? Compared to, again, this is obviously stolen, basically, set up narrative, right? The whole awakening or whatever, or the typical, you know, shounen awakening. But think about when Uriah appears again. I'm assuming it's narrative, but whatever your point. When the old master senior super guy appears, right? He's gonna show some badass stuff, right? Used to just like one cool thing, very minor cool thing, then there's nothing, right? But I wanna see him just like throw out massive fireball, right? Do some mad. He's supposed to be the best spellcaster of the family, or one of the best. At least in the Asian time that they had. But yeah, but most basically, he's the best spellcaster, right? So how fun is it to have the story of him like, oh, I can't do magic anymore, grandson. I'm sorry. How fun is that, you know? It's like, I think it comes back to the issue that Netflix has so often with characters. It's like the Netflix writers, they hate their own characters, right? They hate the character they are working on. I want to see you do some badass stuff, right? I don't want to have Grandpa be a loser, right? I think about my own grandpa. I have two grandpas, right? One of my grandpa was this like badass scientist, math guy, whatever, right? And he was a giant. He was like 2 meters tall and big, muscular. He was the best grandpa ever, you know what I mean? Like when I grew up, you know, grandpa was cool. He was badass. He would do cool stuff right there. If I met my grandpa after having lived for 10 years, I want my grandpa to come in there and be badass. I don't want my grandpa to be like, oh, I'm sorry, boy, I'm tired and a loser now. No one wants to see that. It's really boring. Yeah. There was either those two things, right, you know? In a normal anime, Grandpa will be badass, right? But Netflix, because it's all sad and mooning and so on, and everyone is terrible, everyone is just sad all the time, right? Of course, Grandpa, instead, is the predictable Netflix has like, oh, I can't do magic anymore. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, and see you guys and have a great day.